had wonderful support for tonight's event from Nooner and Paint and Broussard and David. I know Frank Nooner is with us, so I want to ask Frank to come forward. Just a small token of our appreciation. This is the catalog from the exhibition that's on the And is there anybody here from Broussard and David tonight? No, but round of applause for them as well.
Richard Broussard's 70th birthday today. His wife having a party for him.
Is it sure we can see?
Yeah, and since I'm going to the party later, I'll bring it.
Thank you so much. Also want to say thank you to the Acadiana Center for the Arts, who loaned us their microphones, and to Acadiana Open Channel, who is recording our conversation for broadcast this evening. So thank you so much. Tonight's program is inspired by the exhibition that we see on the walls in the gallery. The exhibition is called Slavery, the Prison Industrial Complex, photographs by Keith Calhoun and Chandra McCormick. The exhibition was organized by the Frist Museum and has traveled here to the Hilliard. We are the exclusive venue for Louisiana, so we're proud of that. Before I introduce tonight's program, our curator, Ben Hickey, is going to say a few words about the exhibition.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name, as Luann mentioned, is Ben Hickey. I'm the curator of exhibitions here at the Hilliard. This exhibition comes to us from the Frist Museum in Nashville, and it features Louisiana's most prominent photographers. Chandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun have documented life in the prison system for nearly 40 years, and it's fitting that we are convening this panel to prompt discussion, understanding, and new approaches to reform from across the societal spectrum this evening. When I think about Keith and Chandra's life work, I realize life and art moderate each other. That is why looking at art and contemplating what it means is important. The process enables ideas and events to intermingle with one's very being. With that in mind, please allow me to draw your attention to the photo behind you, right in the center of the aisle. It's titled, "Who's That Man on the Horse?" I don't know his name, but they all call him Boss. He took this image in 1980. In the foreground is a mounted guard at Angola looking off towards a group of prisoners in the distance working. Now the grain of the photographic negative helps the effect, but you see a haze on the horizon where the trees, the field, and the sky meet. To me, the haze and the gritty photographic grain lend the landscape a particularly elemental anthropomorphic quality, almost like it's a land come alive like a person. It's as though the earth is trying to leap into the sky to avoid the dust and heat, although it may only be in the spring and not that hot. Here, the field reflects the brutality of society and how we deal with transgressions. This inhospitable landscape serves as an important reminder to consider the concepts of punishment, something that must be considered. Rehabilitation, wrath, and redemption in a manner that's pragmatic and self-consciously aware of how society amplifies and repeats ills of the past. Rather than being separate like those groups depicted in Keith's photo, groups who must remain separate, we have chosen to come together and share our humanity while we consider those who have, to varying degrees, acted on crueler intentions or shirked societal conventions. What is best for all? We can all agree it's an extremely difficult question, and I'm very eager to hear what everyone has to say. So with no further ado, I will introduce Diane.
As is often the case with art, these photos became a catalyst for conversation. So tonight we'll be talking about the high rate of incarceration in our state of Louisiana, the disproportionate impact on the African American community, and the impact of recent reforms. I'm grateful to our board member, Diane Wooton-Allen, who not only agreed to moderate our discussion tonight, but also helped us to think through the complex issues around our topic and to develop this panel. And I also want to compliment Olivia Morgan, our educator, and Ben Hickey, who did a lot of research and thinking on this topic to guide the discussion as well. Thanks are really due to all of our panelists, so thank you all. We're thrilled to have you participating in this conversation, and in our advanced conversations, many of you provided us with guidance, and we're grateful for that. Now I'd like to introduce Diane Luton-Allen. Diane is the director of the Lafayette chapter of the National Coalition Building Institute. With over 20 years of business consulting experience, she provides services in welcoming diversity, leadership development, creation of productive collaborations, professional facilitation, and strategic planning. She served as Deputy Assistant Secretary to the Department of Cultural Development in the Office of State Parks in Louisiana, and was the first African American to serve as President of the Board of Regents for the National Association of State Park Directors State Park Leadership School. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2005 Women Who Mean Business, 2005 Women of Excellence, and the 2000 Distinguished Citizen Awards. Diane is an alum of UL and currently serves on the Hilliard University Art Museum Advisory Board. Thanks so much, Diane.
Good evening. When we talked about having this panel, we realized after much research that there's no way that we can cover all aspects of prison reform or just criminal justice in general in one night. We realize that. But we do hope to scratch the surface this evening, and if necessary, we'll continue to do this after tonight. I just wanted to, before the panel introduces themselves, I wanted to warn everyone that if you try to talk at the same time or if you go beyond your time, there'll be a slight shock from the microphone. But don't worry. And we'll have everyone introduce themselves. And in your introduction, if you wouldn't mind, please include what makes you so passionate about tonight's topic.
Okay, good evening. My name is Marcus Burnell. I'm currently employed with the Lafayette Consolidated Government. The reason why I'm passionate about taking part in this particular panel is the years of service that I put in the criminal justice field and community policing. One thing that my first encounter with the prison system began in 2011 when I had to visit a few prisons to begin to work with individuals in work release and vocational training / mental health and behavioral health illness. That touched me very closely because I've always tried to figure out what continuously brought our people back and back and back to prison. And the recidivism rate was just that, mental health. And I'm glad to see that we're getting a handle on it, on the prison reform, thanks to our legislatures and the government putting forward the effort. So my passion is vocational rehabilitation and mental health.
Yes, I'm Kathy Fondale. I'm delighted to be here. And members of my class that go to ULL are here too, so I'm really glad that y'all are going to get bonus points, so thank you. I grew up at Angola. I spent 20 years there. I started work there when I was about 23 years old. I was hired on with the Department of Corrections when I was 21, fresh out of USL at the time, and worked on a tower. And I tell people I worked my way down to being an assistant warden about 10 years after that because of my degree, so I stayed in school. Really passionate about people and the fact that people change, and we have these institutions just like we have old hospitals and things like that. Prisons and jails came along when we started settling our communities, and we built them right along churches to remind people of the social contract that we have. So I think words are important, and when I was at Angola, we did our best to let the inmates tell their stories and to let creative people come in and tell theirs through their own lens. I've been very blessed to have grown up not only as a person but as a professional in the field of corrections. Once again, it's corrections. There's plenty of pictures that show the other things that you can see at Angola, the hope in someone's eyes, the possibility that victims can come and talk to offenders using offender dialogue and finally get on that healing path. So I think that in any institution, it's the job of the people that are there to educate themselves, to get to know the population that they serve, both inside and outside, and to start, all the things that relate to finding everybody's purpose and why we're still left together to kind of pick up the pieces together. I think that's the only way we're going to discover peace. That's the only way we'll be free. And I'm delighted to be here with the people here, and I'm delighted to represent the people who do serve and who care about making this world better. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Consuela Gaines, and I'm currently the community organizer for the Lafayette chapter of VOTE, which means Voice of the Experienced. My passion comes from 22 years of experience in the criminal justice system. I spent those 22 years in prison. I was incarcerated at the age of 23 for being foolish, in love, and breaking my boyfriend out of jail. And for that, I was given a 47-year sentence, which I had to do half of it, and I earned a year off of those 23 and a half years by participating in positive things while I was incarcerated. I'm a welding graduate. I graduated from Office System Technology. I was a counsel substitute, a writer for our magazine, amongst so many other things, positive things while I was incarcerated. And to be able to be home now for only 2 years and to be the community organizer for this organization it was actually formed by a couple of guys in Angola who are now home. Our director, Norris Henderson, spent 27 years at Angola on a crime that he didn't commit. Even our deputy director, Bruce Riley, was incarcerated on a murder charge. But now we're out and we are advocates for all of those people we left behind. And for these people out here, we're trying to deter them from going down the route that we did. And my passion, especially as women, because we're often forgot about in the conversations about criminal justice, but I have left behind a lot of mothers and sisters and daughters and aunts and cousins and nieces, women just like men who deserve another chance out here in society as I have been given. And I'm just thankful and grateful to be sitting amongst all of these people right here. And that's about it. You ready, Ron?
Yeah. Thanks, Consuela, and she really deserved a hand of applause for her. Good afternoon, Ryan Haney, good evening. I'm a Lafayette native, and I don't have the experience, the longevity experience as the two panelists on my right in working in the rather criminal justice system or taking part in it, but I'm a contract lobbyist. I do work, the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working on criminal justice reform issues around the state capitol. It's really been an honor to be part of the reforms that have passed the last couple of years. I've represented in the criminal justice sphere a number of organizations. Currently, I'm working really closely with BOTUS, one of my clients with Consuela and Norris Henderson in that group. But also, I've worked, I've represented the Louisiana Prisons for Alternatives, LPA. If anybody goes to the Capitol, I see some of our members here today with the blue shirts at the Capitol. We do work with ACLU's Criminal Justice Reform Group and also SBLC. Which is not my typical work around the state capitol. I mostly do corporate work, but it's been probably the most rewarding item I've been able to work on in my career. We're going to talk more about the bipartisanship and the steps we have made to get Louisiana caught up with other states. And it's really was past this time, and we have a long ways to go. And I'm really privileged to have the opportunity to work in this space. To work with great folks. Just about everybody at this table plays a big part in what we've been able to do the last couple of years. I'm kind of more of a blocking and tackler around the state capitol, helping the good ideas that the folks at this table have and and really are passionate about trying to come to fruition in policy. But like I said, it's something that my passion in it started off kind of as a project, and it's really turned into a passion. And we have a long ways to go, so I'm excited to have the conversation with all you guys.
Hi, I'm Holly Howitt, and the reason I am passionate about criminal justice reform, and this is one word, hope. I am passionate about giving hope to the hopeless. It's been part of my career. I started my career as a speech-language therapist and moved to Lafayette to get my PhD, and fell in love with the guy and Lafayette. And so here I am, almost 20 years later. After I got my PhD, I worked at the P-Card Center for Child Development and Lifelong Learning, and did a lot of work in education and child development, moved into the juvenile justice research, and helped Sheriff Mike Newstrom open up the Juvenile Assessment Center, and after that he asked me to come run the Lafayette Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, which is what I still do in addition to several other things that kind of formed out of that. I also run the Justice and Health Collaborative, and I'm also the community coordinator for the Lafayette Reentry Coalition, and all of that is under my brand new nonprofit, Beacon Community Connections, which really is about community connections for well-being. And so all of that I do really is to help people that live on the margins of society, and people that are returning citizens like Consuela and Marcus, you'll hear from in a minute. I'm very passionate about welcoming them back into the community because they are part of our community, and we need to welcome them in any way that we can.
My name is Alex Poetic Soul Johnson. I am a spoken word poet from Lafayette, Louisiana. I've spent the last 13 years working with at-risk youth. I work with Volunteers of America, Lafayette Parish Juvenile Detention Home. I'm very passionate about this subject because of how much time I've spent working with our youth. They deserve a chance at life. You know, they deserve a second chance. They oftentimes don't have the proper foundation and guidance to help them to stay away from these inappropriate activities, these things that get them in trouble. So I'm going to be their advocate to help them to maintain and have better lives. So that's why I'm so passionate about this prison reform topic. You know, our youth deserve to have a better life and better chances afforded to them.
First of all, I'd like to thank the museum for hosting this very, very important conversation that we're having today. Secondly, I want to just thank for allowing me to come in, and I want to make a full disclosure that I have some opinions that are very strong, and I will voice them. So some people will be uncomfortable. Just don't take it personal. Just the way I see the world. I come to this debate as a former police officer, starting off in New Iberia Police Department. Subsequently hired on as a Louisiana State Trooper and retired as the Superintendent of Louisiana State Police. I'm now the State Representative for House District 96, which represents part of St. Martin, Iberia, and Lafayette parishes. I sat on the Criminal Justice Committee for approximately 6 years. I also sat on the Criminal Justice Task Force that made the 10 recommendations. And I now sit on the Criminal Justice Oversight Committee to determine how the money is going to be spent in our community. I come from this background of criminal justice, and it wasn't until I retired and really took a step back and realized how unjust this system is. And if you look at this wall, this art, and I ask you not to only just look at it from an art perspective, but look at the faces in it, because they're families, their lives, and their people. And our system is broken. And these 10 bills that were passed in 2017 is not even, it's not even scraping the surface as to what has to be done. So I don't want to hear victory laps and that kind of stuff, because the work is just starting and there's a lot more to do. So You haven't heard the passion in my voice as we go on. You will hear about my passion in my heart, because this system is broken. If you're poor, you come from a disenfranchised community, an underserved community, the system is not for you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalie Laborde. I'm here on behalf of my boss, Secretary LeBlanc, the Secretary of the Department of Corrections. The way I always say this world, this issue my life collided with it in a very unforeseen way. Straight fresh out of law school, I worked for the previous governor, really just more on the civil side in the executive counsel's office. And as anyone knows, the turnovers really quickly, and suddenly I found myself as a policy advisor related to criminal justice and law enforcement. That was not my background, so the first thing I knew is I got to get out there and meet the people who know a lot about this. And that was the first time really I had ever been exposed to the prison system side of everything. Secretary LeBlanc really mentored me, showed me the work, this whole issue that had with our prison population climbing, and just the work that he had been doing to reverse that. And then probably the most significant experience for me was through the mansion. There's trustees that work there that are serving life. And I became close friends with one of the guys because I'd see him every morning for 4 years almost. And at the very end, Governor Jindal chose to do one commutation, and I had the privilege of telling this man. It was just, my boss was out of town, so I got to tell Harrison, hey, you get a second chance at life. And that was one of the most incredible, life-changing moments for me. I thought I could do this with the rest of my life. Just, to play a part in that one person's life. It really was the impetus for me choosing the next steps to work in the corrections reform area. And just, it has been an honor, just like Ryan said, just to sit alongside and work alongside of a lot of incredible heroes who come from all different aspects of this, from the policy side to formerly incarcerated. And I've made some friends that, just life has a way of surprising you. So my primary role is, just like Representative Landry mentioned, the JRI task force. That was really my main project. I came on board to help with. Secretary LeBlanc was the chair of that, so I helped with all the staffing of that, and then continue with the implementation side now with the reinvestment.
My name is John Milton. I am currently pastor at Imani Temple, which is part of the African American Catholic Congregation. I'm duly vocational, however, I am also an attorney, and I've practiced law here for 30 years. 10 of which I was a prosecutor on the 6th floor of the district attorney's office downtown Lafayette. When I first began, I was a drug prosecutor in 1993. I first began at the DA's office. Not long after, the policy of placing 100,000 police officers on the streets of America, that we might begin a process of community policing and somehow create a new policing policy that will meet the needs of the various and the varying communities of our country. What was good intended ended up contributing substantially to the situation we're in right now with the mass incarceration. While the statistics show that many of those who contribute to mass incarceration are a result of violent crimes, it is the drug trade that leads to the violence in many cases. I'm aware of so many intricate details from sitting on the other side. When I became a prosecutor, we would charge a young man, 18, 19 years old, $5,000 fine, give him a maximum of 5 years incarceration, and put him on probation for 5 years. Question is, how is he going to pay that $5,000 fine? Is he going to sell more dope? Our whole process of criminal justice reform bothers the heck out of me. When I hear the justification being how it's going to save us money, or how it is that right before we go into prison reform that we're going to increase the probation fee from $60 to $75 and put more people on paper. When I was in the Marine Corps, I walked around thinking I live in the freest country in the world. Only to realize later when coming home that actually we're the most incarcerated country in the world. I'm happy that we are now recognizing it, quote unquote, but I'm where Representative Landry is. We got a long way to go, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Hello, my name is Marcus Simmons, and I'm an educator for South Louisiana Community College, where I teach welding. I also own a fitness company. That's important because when I conclude what I'm trying, the message I'm trying to get across, it'll make sense. I'm passionate about this is because I see and I've been past what you guys are looking at. And I know what goes on behind these walls because I've touched that fence. I've carried that hope. I've picked those peas. But a lot of things that you don't see on those walls is the wickedry behind that fence, the way you treat it, the way you beat on, the way you starve. And I'm here to bring the truth to this committee. I apologize if I'm a little bit profound, but this is real for me. And this is a dream come true because I remember when I would sit in Camp J, see that little place where these guys are sitting there. I sat in there so many times with no hope of ever coming home, no hope of being anything. And I reminisce so many times on how I had no one in my life to ever tell me that I was smart, or that I could go to college, or that anything was available for me except selling drugs and proving that I'm not a punk, excuse the expression, but that's what it was in my day. And I'm sorry because I'm really reliving each one of these pictures right now. And I promised myself in that cell, I promised my God Yahweh that if he ever gave me a second chance, that I would dedicate my life to doing exactly this, to helping fix my community and helping these young boys to understand, and women to understand that they are smart. So I live my life by example. And today, everything that I do with my life is fixing my community. And I teach young people that we need to be a fragrance instead of an odor in this place and leave it a better place than we found. Because we all someday have to be responsible. We all have to one day live our purpose, and that's to be responsible. Our true purpose, our true, and the true commandment from my God Yahweh is to be fruitful and multiply. And in return, we have to be responsible for the things for the fruit that we produce. And that's why I want to better myself, and that's why I wanted to better my community. And just thank you guys for being here and for allowing me to be here.
I need a minute. That's hard to follow. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Dr. Amy Stearns. I'm an assistant professor of criminal justice at UL Lafayette. I'm a criminologist. I teach gender, crime and justice, juvenile justice, restorative justice. My research deals with parents who are incarcerated, the experiences of women behind bars, particularly jailed women, and how they access hope. Also long-term prisoners and how they are able to combat these feelings of being socially dead in our society. I also study, which is a little bit different, but the food that prisoners and jailed people make behind bars, their resourcefulness and creativity in making meals and dishes that are palatable and incredibly creative and delicious in spite of what they are served and what they are able to buy. The reason that I am passionate about criminal justice, there are 10 million children in the United States who will experience a parent being incarcerated, and I am one of those children grown up.
Thank you. The format for tonight for the panelists is that I'll ask the question and I'll direct it to a specific member of the panel, but of course everyone has a chance to chime in once that's complete. For the audience, if you have questions, we're asking you to hold it until the end, and then we'll entertain your questions at that time. The first question is directed to Natalie. Most citizens are largely unaware of how the prison system actually functions overall, but specifically on an operational basis. To help clarify, we have a couple of questions. How many state and parish facilities are there, and how are prisoners assigned to those facilities?
That's a great question. And I think when we look at our overall incarceration rate, that's probably one of the biggest drivers to our problem. And that's because we have what's called a bifurcated system. We have roughly, it changes a little bit, but I believe total of 8 state facilities at the time, presently. And then the remaining half of the state population is housed in local jails. And the way that came about was, I believe, it was in the 70s, a little bit before my time. But the state was under a consent decree from the federal government, which required us to decrowd our state facilities. And the decision was made at the time, rather than build new state facilities, which would be more expensive, to contract, pay a per diem to house felony inmates at the local level. I don't think anyone ever envisioned that it would grow into what it's become, and then the system it would create. We hear a lot, there's been a lot of coverage about the incentive for sheriffs to house inmates because it will fund their law enforcement side. I think that's not indicative of all sheriffs, but we hear, correct. We have a lot of great examples of sheriffs that are doing reentry facilities and really implementing programs, but that has created a system that is very difficult to unwind. And so the way a person is placed at either state or local, for the most part, our state level facilities, which is essentially where you would want to be, there's the most programs, the best medical care, all those types of things. It's going to be your higher need inmates, or your longer serving, or your higher risk. We take in those at the state facilities. The remaining, your lower level, people who are actually going to come, go back into the community pretty quickly, are most often serving in a local facility. And it's hit or miss in terms of what programs you're getting, if you have access to your family. And up until about a year ago, it really was, there's a lot of agreements between local sheriffs who all house your inmates. For example, if you get convicted in Baton Rouge, a week later you may be housed in Catahoula. So that's a big problem for family members to visit their incarcerated loved ones, or for lawyers, or to have access to your lawyers. That is part of the reinvestment. The focus is for, again, we have funding, but like Representative Landry said, it's not a ton of money, so we have to choose an area to focus this first round. But we're focusing on the 5 parishes that typically have the most people, generate the most people coming into the system, but organizing and housing people strategically that are returning back to Orleans, Jefferson, Baton Rouge, in the Plaquemines jail, which brings people closer to home, closer to their families, closer to their lawyers. But up until then, there really is not an organized system for where someone is housed at the local level other than the individual agreement. I'm sure I know Representative Landry has a lot of thoughts on that.
I am chomping at the bit. I love Natalie and I love Secretary LeBlanc. And I've worked with a lot of secretaries as a police officer and police administrator. And I said it privately and I'll say it publicly. Jimmy LeBlanc is our best hope for reform. And he has lived up to that expectation and beyond. There's just some things I disagree. And he inherited a system that was flawed and was incentivized by money. And she's right. But it was the law that was passed by President then Bill Clinton on the tough on crime and incentivize states to pass tough on crime laws that really had unintended consequences with this mass incarceration. The state decided they couldn't or didn't want to build any more state facilities, so they made a contract with these sheriffs to house their prisoners at a per diem. Well, most sheriffs, a lot of sheriffs went out to their defense and sold bonds and built facilities and started housing state inmates. And they're left whole in the bag, and that's not fair. But the problem is the way those inmates are housed and set, in many instances, you had a model here, jail with Sheriff Newstrom, because he was attacking the mental health problem, he was attacking the literacy problem, he was attacking the vocational problem, and he was doing an outstanding job, and he had a model program here at Lafayette. But I beg to you to go find another program like that in the majority of these local jails. Rehabilitation is something you very seldom hear about in local jails. Very seldom. They've supplemented it with the work release program. That's your rehabilitation. So, again, some things are out of the Secretary's hands as he have moved on, I mean, as the reform comes, but there's profit in people being incarcerated. Yes, I said it, and I mean it.
And what dictates that? Again, what dictates how the prisoner's time is spent in the specific facility? Madam?
Ma'am, sorry. You have the friends.
What dictates how the prisoner's time is spent in the specific facility?
Just to make sure I'm understanding the question in terms of,
I got an opinion about that too.
the class, the job assignment or the programmatic side of it? Is that just to make sure I'm understanding? Okay. I can give you the 30,000-foot answer. Certainly my boss would be better to speak to that because he has been awarded. But in general, based again on your security classification, so that's going to have a huge part on it in terms of whether or not you would be eligible for a trustee status, both internally or to be on an outside type of work group. That will determine your work assignment. And then also your classification will impact, as I understand it, the programmatic side of everything as well. If you're a lower level security classification, then you'll have access to any of the types of programs which you would like to participate in. Again, at a state facility, that's much more ideal. At a local level, it's going to be very difficult to have the access to the programs depending upon where you're housed.
You mentioned classification. What determines what classification you get?
I'm seeing Consuela shake your head a little bit, and she can probably speak to it a little bit better than I can, honestly, having been incarcerated for. Were you at LCIW the majority of the time?
Yes, yeah. I spent 21 years at LCIW. And how they classified offenders was, of course, they took into consideration their risk, if they were a high risk or a low risk offender. Their mental condition came into it. Medical came into that decision. Everyone worked, regardless of age, up until recently, where a person gets to like 70 something and they don't have to work. But everyone, if they are in a wheelchair, are made to work, even if it's just rubbing a wall or rubbing a table just in one spot all day long, 8 hours a day. So classification, I was a counsel substitute, which meant I was an inmate lawyer for about 10 years. And I would have to sometimes be in classification when people were being classified and sent to their specific dormitory. And oftentimes they're asked the question if they have any enemies or they look at whether or not this person had special needs, and they try to put offenders in dormitories that were more conducive to them, and also in jobs that they felt were better suited for that particular inmate. Be it most of your younger people, depending on the nature of their charges they were serving time for, a lot of them will be put on details where they can go outside of the prison and work, cutting grass. But the majority of the inmates worked on the inner perimeter of the prison, in housekeeping, in the dormitories, in the yard, cutting grass, keeping the lawns and everything looking very beautiful. We had floor workers, we had other jobs, we had tutors, we had maintenance crews, we had so many different jobs that we could actually have in a garment factory, sewing for Prison Enterprise, making t-shirts and things of that nature. So it was every day, Monday through Friday, you had people working, and also the kitchen, the canteen. So there was a place for people to work, and all of that was part of classification.
Okay, thank you.
It kind of,
Sherry,
Can I make one-
said he had something else to add?
I'm gonna be quiet a little long.
Okay.
I'd like to make this one point. So we've been focused right now on people that have been convicted in our local jails. We also have a high number of pretrial detainees. These are people that have not yet been convicted and are therefore presumed innocent at that time. And in the Lafayette Parish Jail, which probably has about 900 inmates right now, probably 2/3 of them are pretrial detainees. And so that, I think we need to, that needs to be brought up too.
I'd like to add to that. I was a state employee all my life, and I would hear things, and I thought I knew everything because I was at Angola, and we just did everything, including the death penalty and all that. I thought I was just a rocket scientist. And I got an opportunity to work at the local level, and my eyes were really, really open to the crisis that we have, and it's at the local level is where we need to implement sentence reform and look at how people get into this system. It's very different, and I want to just briefly, for example, the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison was built in the 60s, and referring back to, you talking about classification and all the things that Consuela spelled out that the state institutions have, like the ability to have a workforce and to keep up with facilities, the local facilities did not. They got overcrowded not only because of a per diem that has not increased since the 80s. It's been about $25 is what you get to house an inmate from the state. The state inmate that's housed locally should have, in essence, everything that state facility provides. The local facilities cannot do that. When I was the warden here in Lafayette, I sent 200 inmates back to the state because it was overcrowded, and it was not good for the inmates, it was not good for the staff. We had inmates sleeping on bunks in the floor when I got there. As good as their programs were, we couldn't get the inmates to the programs because it was overcrowded. That does not speak ill of anybody. It speaks to a backed up system where people are continuing to spend more time in jail away from the treatment that they need. If we talk about mental health, if you talk about juvenile justice, that's more time away from their normal school and their, and everything else that goes with that. What we did in East Baton Rouge, we don't hold 17-year-olds there anymore because the facility that they were actually housed in, it was too run down. And that's because they don't have the daily maintenance and the resources that the state facilities have. When I started with the state, for example, we had 13 facilities. We now have 9 for the state. All those facilities closed during my tenure because of the lack of resources. Where are those beds going? Well, they're going to the locals, not because the locals are asking for them, because they're already housing a growing number of local level inmates. That is their chief priority, and to fund that. It's very expensive to take over the care, custody, and concern of inmates and their families and everything that goes with that at the local level, which is why I'm very passionate about everything that we can do as a community to hope to fix these jails and make them the crisis intervention centers that they should. And it's very possible. We did it here in Lafayette through working with groups like Holly and working with returning citizens like Consuelo. There are several women, for example, and women is a huge issue. You fix a man, you fix a man. You fix a woman, you fix a family. That's the deal. And I was real passionate. You know, the women's prison flooded in 2006, and it's still closed. You have 2016. I'm sorry, 2016, and you have all these women dispersed because there's one place in the state to hold state women. One. There was, you know, like I just said, 12 others when I started. So geographically, you could put inmates where they could do family visitation and things like that. And I want to speak to the fact that when we can't house an inmate because he's too far away in East Baton Rouge from his trial date, we send them to institutions that are better equipped to hold them in a constitutional environment. And guess what? When their attorneys call, we bring them back the next day. If they have a family that wants to see them, we bring them back the next day. So that's also extra money, but it's humane and it's the right thing to do. It's expensive to do this. And I think the conversation really needs to always include what's happening locally so we can make that connection.
Okay, thanks.
Now, can I just say something else about while we're on incarceration? And the major metropolitan areas, East Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, I mean, they don't rely on inmate population to run their jails. They really don't, because they have their own issues to deal with. But there's another element of our incarceration that causes any major harm, and that's private institutions. Private institutions are guaranteed 90% bed space. Is it 90? It's pretty close. And all you get is a cot and 3 meals. There's the phone, there's the commissaries. All those inflated, when I say inflated, that's an understatement. What it costs to talk to a loved one who is incarcerated, or talk to your lawyer. It's inflated. That money is gone to the local jails, it's gone to the private jails. So there are more elements than the $24 per diem that is being paid to the local jails. Again, I want to emphasize the major metropolitans are not reliant on that money because they have their own local population that they have to deal with. But there is a private jail in this state that has a contract, and I suggest that you don't get much. My number one call for services as a legislator is not about education, it's not about health care, it's about my child's locked up somewhere. That's the number one call.
Okay. Natalie, one last question on the operations. Who sets and enforces the standards followed by facilities throughout the state? And in your answer, could you include information on the conditions of those facilities?
Sure. So in terms of the standards enforcement, that's really been a large project for the department, for headquarters over the last year. So traditionally, and over the last 20 to 30 years, and Kathy can probably speak to this as well, we've been a decentralized agency. And so what that means is essentially the units, the institutions, the prison facilities operated autonomously. There was some oversight from headquarters, but typically the role was more of the policy side, handling the budget, the engagement with the legislature, things like that. Where there's really been a shift for a number of reasons where it's absolutely needed to standardize and ensure that all of our institutions are doing things the same way, that they're abiding by the department regulations. So the regulations, which govern the institutional side of things, come from headquarters. I think there's definitely been some inconsistency of how those things are carried out, and that's not necessarily a product of people choosing not to do things, or it's that because they have had that flexibility, the institutions had the discretion to do things in their own way. Whereas we've really pulled in the reins over the last couple of years, and that's a big challenge, especially when you're dealing with an agency who's traditionally for the last 40 plus years, they've operated much differently. So that's what we're moving towards, what we would call a centralized governing side of everything. Secretary really brought that in. That was certainly not something how even the previous secretary operated. And then I'm sorry, what was the next question?
Could you include information on conditions of the facility?
I think overall, our state facilities are very old. The newest one was, I believe, built in the early 80s, that would make it roughly 30 years old. So you're dealing with all of that. We repeatedly request in our budget request every year funds to revamp, to remodel facilities. As you know, that this isn't really the ideal situation. In our budget situation, we haven't gotten those funds in a long time. So it's no secret that all of our facilities need a lot of improvement. One example, and I heard the gentleman over here reference Camp J. That was the disciplinary unit at Angola, which I'm proud and happy to say we've closed down. It's no longer operating, and if it will be opened up, it would be remodeled and used mostly for a medical facility. But even that whole model, Camp J, the punitive model, is something we're completely revamping. We're working closely with the Vera organization to completely revamp our segregation policies, which has really been a privilege to work on personally, and then hopefully we're creating a model that other states can follow. But that is a very good example of a dilapidated facility that was very dangerous, very much needed of repairs. And probably a good example of a lot of what some of our other institutions are facing as well. Very old facilities and just not really been given the budget to make the repairs that we need.
The next question is addressed to Ryan Haney. Please describe the nature of the recently passed bipartisan prison reform legislation in the state of Louisiana.
Thanks so much. So I think a couple folks said it. We really kind of scratched the surface, and I can yield some of my time to some other folks. It was bipartisan, and that was definitely a highlight. It was bipartisan, and we did have cooperation with the DAs and the sheriffs. But it really was bipartisan more on terms of businesses looking, it was phrased in a way where it was trying to get people back to work and save money. Anytime that the legislation would deal with violent offenders, sex offenders, anything really beyond drug and lower level offenses, it was much harder to get bipartisan support. And that's where we're at right now. We've kind of done all the low-hanging fruit. And people are really nervous about their re-election. And so I think this next election cycle is going to be important. Unanimous jury passing the voters with 63% of the vote was I think a really big win for the state, for reform advocates. This governor's re-election is going to be a big indicator on how the people see criminal justice reform, and then all of your local legislators. There's a lot of fear, especially among Republicans and conservatives, that their votes on these bills are going to come up in their elections. And until we get through this election cycle, and until we get a little bit more courage from the right side of the legislature, we're not going to see the progress that other states have seen that we need to see. And so the nature of them has been pretty immature in where we need to be. And bipartisanship is important. There has been Republicans vote for every bill, but there has still been 40% of the body voting against the bills. And as this legislature is going to get more conservative next year, we need more sea change to continue with more policy changes. And that's not a good news. That's just the reality where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, if I may, the package was 10 bills that were submitted by bipartisan, and what we hope to do is to bring some of the sentencing guidelines. We had some mandatory minimum sentences that the judges had no authority or no flexibility in, and so we tried to adjust those pieces of legislation that had mandatory mandate. For people that don't know, there are people doing life without the benefit of parole under the habitual offender law that didn't commit a violent or a sexual crime. Just think about that. They didn't commit a sexual or violent crime. The crime was a property crime or something, but doing life without the benefit of parole. we align those. We also try to remove the obstacles. Many of these people go to jail. They've got fees and fines that they owe, and they come out and they can't get a driver's license, they can't get an apartment, they can't do anything, they owe child support. So what we try to do is try to limit that hurdle that faced them and give them an opportunity to start anew, not forgiving their debt or their responsibilities, but not make it a condition of them going back. We modified the probation issues, broadened it so more people can be on it, Pastor. I mean, about more people being on paper, but what it did, there's some people going to be on paper for the rest of their lives. But we gave them an opportunity to have probation in lieu of locking people up. Not every person being locked up for 25 years for a nonviolent crime, that's something that just really doesn't make sense. Our laws were not aligned with the rest of the country, and would cause us to have an overpopulation. The things that, as despicable and disgusting as sagging is, I don't think a guy should go to jail for sagging. We criminalize everything that we don't like today. Everything we don't like and we should be addressing socially, educationally, we put a criminal penalty on it. So there's 10 bills, and again, ban the box. A guy go apply for a job, you tell him, say, you get out, go get you a job, you can take care of your family. Well, the first thing he faces on the application, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Well, guess what the guy getting the application does when he sees it? Throw it in the trash can. Throw it in the trash can. Same thing went into colleges and universities. First, you have to do ban the box. We passed legislation that eliminated that. Not that you have to not disclose it, but it's the proper places to where you're sitting in an interview and you can tell your story and you can tell people the circumstances. So again, it was as comprehensive as we can, as Ryan said, for the nature of the legislature. The legislature is very conservative, and to get conservative legislators to sponsor some of these bills was a major win for a lot of us. So the bill didn't solve all the problems, but it's a great start in terms of allowing people a chance when they get out of the institutions.
Just real quickly, you reminded me of this. I wrote a letter, a man at Angola who had birthday cake with and everything like that. Much like Daddy, you see in the picture over there, he was the oldest inmate in the United States at the time when I was there. Actually, that's a younger picture of him. But he had a birthday cake one time, and all the inmates made it, and had a camp out, and we had like 94, I think he was 94, candles on there for him, And anyway, I wrote this letter, and this is one of the really good things that the people working inside of corrections over the years have been able to do. But the pardon board is also a very effective tool that's being used a lot more now. I'm really proud to see that work being done. Not only because of the great work of Cheryl Renata, he was my mentor, but we get to speak on behalf of inmates, and I get letters from inmates, now that I'm in East Baton Rouge, and even when I was in Lafayette, I get letters from inmates from Angola who are very old now. And the letter that I wrote the other day for the pardon board to have some mercy was a man who's about to turn 80. He committed murder. It was a 17-year-old girl that he knew at the time, and he was 17 himself, which is no longer, he can't be sentenced to life without the benefit of a pardon or parole, excuse me. But anyway, I wrote this letter. It's really emotional for me. He's been in Angola for over 40 years. Like I said, he's about to be 80. He's got some family that want to take him, but he's also got some former inmates that are working with lawyers that have a program, the Louisiana Pardon Project, that are going to work with him. So they would agree to house him and get him sorted and make sure that he's, got everything that he needs to have a shot and to support that family that's going to take him after 40 years, because he doesn't even know the person that's going to be taking him, but their family. That's smart corrections, guys. This guy was a trustee for more than 33 years with us, and I'm not talking about a Butler trustee in the mansion. I'm talking about he was on Angola and he did some, he never lifted a finger, They did work for us, but they were almost like quasi-staff. And later on, they became mentors and things to others. So we really have a community out there. I can tell you right now, I'm not there, and I feel guilty because they've sandbagged about 68,000 sandbags along the levee. And that's something that we work together every year. You couldn't tell staff and inmates. So what I'm saying is that after a while, though, you get to know these people. You can't blanket correct deviant behavior. Every murder is not the same. Every rapist is not the same. But to involve the victims and the survivors and the community, along with the people inside that are creating this atmosphere for change, that is what I feel like we do on a daily basis all over this state, and that is what we need help with, and to communicate, this is all that we know about this person. You know, this person deserves another camper. This person needs a little bit more time with us, but this is what he's going to need when he goes out. And I salute those of you here that do support our efforts. I know several of you from other meetings that I've been to, and several people here at the table that do that, because that's when you go down. You know, break up all the complexities. It's about people. It's not about these buildings that are falling down around us. It's about the people inside them. And we've got to hire the right people that have a heart for this kind of work.
And I'd like to add, just from the perspective of our juveniles. So I'll give you two examples. I had an 11-year-old who shot his father in the chest with a shotgun. He was 11. Now let's take it further. Why would an 11-year-old shoot his father? With all things, a shotgun, for him to be able to handle that. I wonder what happened in his life that made him want to do that. I had a 14-year-old girl who was incarcerated for stealing a vehicle. She was in foster care. She stole her foster parents' vehicle to go and find her mother, who was on drugs, living in the street. And then she became incarcerated. Now she's a juvenile. When she becomes an adult, her record will be expunged. But that doesn't shift her chance of recidivism, of going back to prison. But knowing her stance from a child, you're in foster care because your mother is a drug addict. You have an 11-year-old boy who felt so compelled to shoot his father. We have to think about the background of the individuals who are incarcerated. They may not have had a chance to be educated to anything else. So I just wanted to put those thoughts into your minds of when we're speaking of prisoners, you know, we often think of just criminals, they do horrible things, they don't deserve a chance. But an 11-year-old shot his father in the chest with a shotgun. At 11 years old, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Make sense?
Okay, thank you. Ryan, from the standpoint of building consensus across the political spectrum, what measures seem to be the most successful? And as a follow-up to that, were there any issues that were tabled or deemed less successful due to the difficulty in building bipartisan consensus?
Yeah, and I kind of addressed it in my last answer, and I'll yield some time to some other folks, but, you know, for the business community, they really only got involved on things that dealt with like barriers to workforce. They were helpful on some licensing. You know, right now it's pretty hard to get just about any license with convictions on your record, and much less serving time. There was some consensus on lower level drug offenses, but really when you got to the violent crime issues, people tended to, like, you turn around, me and Terry turn around and our army was gone of business advocates who were, you know, were really just there for the easy stuff. And so that's kind of the answer. That's the stuff that fell by the wayside. The DAs were able to pick off the conservative legislators on the violent crimes and the sex offenses. Legislators weren't ready to make that big of a leap. And look, we were trying to eat a whole elephant at once. We were last. We were the most incarcerated state. Now we're not. You know, I think we're 49. Mississippi's, we passed Mississippi up. But for Louisiana, I'm telling you, a lot of folks didn't think we could do what we did. And so, you know, I don't want to, you know, rain on the parade. It was a huge success. It was one of the biggest leaps any state's ever made. From where we started to where we ended up in that session, it was the most progress any state made in 1 year. And so, you know, it only makes sense natural change in any process or system, you can't do it all at once. Where we're at now is trying to get that momentum back. And it's been difficult because the typical mind of a policymaker is do something and see how people react before you go and keep going and do more. And so that's kind of in a nutshell. I don't know.
So there were no,
One
question. So there were no issues tabled?
Yeah.
No, there were.
No, I'm saying everything about
The 10 bills are not the report, yeah, there were quite a few issues tabled.
Yeah, you have to look at the report. I think the report is available. The Pew Institute did a great job providing the data. But, you know, I go back to this. The people that fought the reform were the people who were either, let me put it, I don't want to, because I don't want to make it appear like people are doing something disingenuous or illegal. But elections have consequences. Elections have consequences. And if you elect a person on a tough on crime initiative and he tell you he's gonna throw away the key and throw them away, then that's what you're gonna get. If you elect a district attorney and he promises you that he's gonna put everybody in jail that comes across his desk, that's what you're gonna get. So if we sit and don't vote and don't get informed about what people's positions are, you know, most enforcers, sheriffs, and they run on tough on crime initiative. How's that work for us? It hasn't worked out pretty good. So I do believe, and unfortunately, our legislators are in districts where they never hear from their constituents about criminal justice. They never hear from their constituents about the tough on crime initiative. They never hear from their constituents because those people who live in those gated communities, I guess, it's not affected by it. It's not affected by it. So, you know, I have now before I leave here now, I got to toot my own horn. I have a bill for the last 3 years to abolish the death penalty.
Yes.
It's the most difficult thing I've done in my life. It really, because every crime has a victim. Every crime has a victim. But when I see the disparity, and I see the bias, and I see the racism in the death penalty, in Louisiana, it's the Civil War. It's been since the Civil War that a white man was executed for killing a black person. In America, it's been over 67 years that a white man has been convicted for killing an African American. We have the highest cases of exoneration, not technicalities, exonerations. People who are set free and people who are innocent. Is it worth putting someone to death? And we're no better off than those states that don't have it. As a matter of fact, we're worse off. Because scripture says, Pastor, violence begets violence. So if you're afraid, this ain't for you. If you're not strong and willing to stay, I don't work for the DAs, I don't work for the sheriffs, I don't work for the governor, I work for the people of the District of 96. And until we get that and hold those legislators accountable, we're going to continue to let a handful of people control this whole process.
And I have a question. Before we move forward, I have a question. Raise your hand if you knew there was a penitentiary in Baton Rouge prior to Angola. Right, that there was a penitentiary in Baton Rouge prior to Angola. There was like maybe 6 people. And prior to the Civil War, majority of incarcerated people were white males. Did you know that? Raise your hand if you knew that. It wasn't until after the Civil War that majority of inmates were African American. I think it's important, since a lot of us do not know that we reevaluate our thought process, because it means that we are uneducated on the topic. There are some things we must go back and learn. We can continue.
Since we've been talking about on the state legislature and state laws and how it affect the prison system, I got to tell you, I've listened to a lot, and I appreciate Representative Landry, what he's doing, and I've been knowing him some time now. When I started out as a police officer, as you know, the criminal justice system has 3 components. One is police, the second one is courts, the third is corrections. I had the opportunity to work in each one of them, but also had the opportunity to meet Marcus at the end of the table when he first got released. He came into my office. I was doing community policing at the time, and I thought I knew a lot about the community, and at the time, crack cocaine was at its heights. We did a good job at trying to doing some things to help people, but we didn't help those individuals, or we still, to this day, we don't have a plan to help those individuals when they come back. Those same people, those same numbers that you see going, are the same numbers that's coming back. Judge Edwards and I, we looked at a plan. We thought we had a plan that was going to work. Mr. Milton talked about in the court system about working with drug offenders and trying to get drug offenders to rehabilitate through treatment. So we started drug court. That was my court process. Drug court went well because it was some type of punishment to an individual who was under influence. I remember sitting in one of the state meetings and they were deciding about where the money should be shifted. Should it be shifted to substance abuse or should it be shifted to mental health? At the time, I raised my hand up twice for substance abuse because that's what I seen. I seen crack cocaine. I seen families. I seen tearing up many families. But as I got out of the government side and I went on my own, I was able to work with correctional facilities. And correctional facilities did not do anything for us vocational training / mental health. And the clinical psychiatrist taught me something. Not everybody's born crazy. Not everybody's born with a substance abuse issue. It's something that takes place in that process. So I had to go back to my community policing initiatives when I used to walk the streets and talk to families, talk to aunts when they come, or the grandmothers with them in court, trying to find a way to save them. It's a mental health issue, y'all. I wish I'd have raised my hand for mental health at the time because mental health would have been an issue to address the concern, and we would put more educated, more treatment-oriented people, such as doctors and individuals who knew that particular education level. But I'm gonna go back to Marcus. When I met Marcus coming in my office, and I didn't know what to tell him. I sat down, I looked at his aunt who brought him in, and he was reaching. He was reaching, trying to find something, and I couldn't help him. So not long after that, I met another guy that was a legend to me in my community because I was born and raised here. I met him, he was at Angola, but he was working on the power line. But he traveled from prison to prison to prison. And whenever he had opportunity, as you know, inmates do write you. They'll write you 100 times a day. He wrote me 2-3 times, but he was very trained. He is a smart individual. Marcus proved himself by coming back into the city, getting his education, became a welder. Now he's an instructor. This same person that I'm talking to you about runs his own electrical business because I helped him get his electrical license to do local work. But he was doing electrical work without any safety gear. So that means that as an inmate, he was on a power line that had voltage going through that could have killed him. But did it matter? Did it matter to them? No. So, but my story to you is this, that if you touch on the training and you touch on the knowledge that that individual received while he was incarcerated, I guarantee you, he could be placed in a workplace that can take him to the next level. Let's talk about local. That's my area, local area. I've yet to sit in a council meeting. I've yet to sit in any department meeting that anybody talked about prison reform, people being released back to our community. What can we do to help them to come back to our community? What can we do for his training? The first thing you do when you walk down the city hall, you see so many people looking at the board, looking at job positions. You gotta look at their faces. You gotta look at their faces, because the faces tell it all. So my voice tonight, and if anything you leave with this, is on the local level. Talk to your local to assist Representative Landry and so forth, and the governor. Maybe I'm giving Terry a hint, I don't know. But it's like we need to work with them in this process on the local level. We all here sitting in this room, we locals, okay? I don't think anybody traveled too far to come here. But as you talk to your representative, if you talk to the administration, let's talk together. Let's help people like Marcus when he comes out, that we can talk to him and give him an answer, instead of just telling him or watching him walk out that door. Thank you.
Could you just give us a brief summary of Louisiana's current state felon voting law?
Okay, yes, ma'am. Last year, in the last legislative session, we were able to, with the help of Representative Patricia Smith, to push forth a bill to allow people who were convicted of felonies to be able to register to vote after they've been released out of prison for 5 or more years. The law has always been, once a person comes off of probation and parole, that automatically will give a person that right back. And March 1st, this particular law, Act 636, went into effect for people who have been out of prison 5 or more years. And also if they are on probation, which most of the time a person won't receive more than 3 to 5 years probation. Even if a person is currently on parole, because a lot of people are on parole for a long amount of time, such as myself, I have about 20 more years on parole. But being that I've been home 2 years, that means I'll be eligible to register to vote in 3 years, God spared my life. And it is so imperative for us to get the word out, because a lot of people don't even realize that this particular law affects them. And a lot of people that I've come into contact with who have been home 10, 20 years and who have been off of parole or paper, they didn't know because they're not given that information as they're being released from state. And we have to continue to push forward. I mean, there are some things within that particular bill that are going to be amended this legislative session that's coming up, but we will definitely continue to move forward with it. Nothing's perfect yet, so we're just going to continue to move forward and let people know that they are now eligible to register to vote if they fall under those qualifications.
Thank you. This question is for Representative Landry. In Louisiana, like the rest of the country, the arrest and incarceration rate, as well as the severity of sentencing among African Americans, are substantially higher than other demographic groups. What phenomena contribute to this trend, and are we currently implementing effective solutions?
I've talked so much, but I gotta answer this one. Well, I mean, we have some well-qualified people here that are criminologists, but doing my experiences, not only as a legislator, but as a a citizen of this state. The one thing that, the word that has not come up tonight is poverty. Poverty. Yeah, poor, people with poor. Yeah. And we have a disproportionate amount of poverty in this state compared to the other states. And I think it's the source of a lot of our problems. I think it's the source of our education, our healthcare, our criminal justice system, and people who cannot read, and we take for granted that everyone has the same skill set that we have. And I see young people today that can't read, can't write, and we ask them to go out and take care of their families. They can't go online and fill out an application, so they start selling drugs. When crack cocaine and street drugs like marijuana, crack cocaine was very prominent in our community, we criminalized it. We criminalized it, I mean, beyond what anyone could ever imagine. Over 80% of the people incarcerated in Louisiana are African Americans. Now we have an opioid problem, and it's in the middle class household, and now we're looking for treatment. We're looking for open clinics. That's hypocrisy to me. It's hypocrisy. And we want to know why young African Americans are angry. Because they see the disparity in the laws. They see if you're poor, and if you're poor, you can't afford an attorney, and you have to rely on public defenders. And not that they're bad people, but they don't have the resources. They're funded by fines and fees. So they go in and plea bargain. In lieu of going to jail for 25 years, you get 12 years. What kind of justice is that? So if you're wealthy and can afford an attorney, or if you're connected, you go into a diversion program, or sometimes you don't even get called out. So hopefully, the laws that we pass, it's not going to solve those issues. But again, I go back to elections matter. Elections matter. And if we continue buying the same old snake oil propaganda, we're going to continue to get the same results. We have an election coming from governor on down. And some of these people are going to go unopposed. Some of the people who have voted no on criminal justice reform, some of the people who voted no on Medicaid expansion, some of the people who voted no on everything because they think government is the enemy. Elections matter. So the bottom line is our population, our prison population definitely doesn't reflect the population in the state. Now you draw your own conclusion, whether it's bias or we're not civilized people. I reject the latter.
And there's no solution currently.
Well, I think the solution is, the little I know about history, no revolution or no change starts from the top.
Right.
It starts from the bottom.
Right.
And until we demand, it's going to be the status quo.
And it breaks my heart when I have students, I don't like to call them inmates, when I have students who like being in jail because they don't have anywhere to go when they leave jail. They don't have homes. Or if they do have a home, it's not a stable environment. So they rather be incarcerated because they found people that love them there. Whether it be the guard or whoever, that's where they find their family. Even if it's to see me, which pisses me off. Don't come back to jail because you want to see me. But they don't have a foundation. So they find their 3 meals, their 3 hots in a cot, to be more supportive than having no food at home. So they make bad decisions. One more thing, going back to what I said earlier about the Baton Rouge Penitentiary. Angola, do you guys know who paid for Angola to be built? Anybody? Baton Rouge Penitentiary, the sale of the equipment, the money that the state gave to the Baton Rouge Penitentiary for upkeep, inmate labor, paid for the purchase of the land and construction of Angola. Okay. Okay. I like to
When I think about Angola, what do you think? What is Angola? Where is that? That's an African.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's an African country, yes.
There's something about that,
Yes.
about Angola.
Yes.
It's very, very comforting for a young African American.
Representative Landry, a follow-up question. Ideologies often push answers toward one extreme or another. Have you encountered solutions that represent a third path that perhaps was an unpalatable concession to policymakers and their constituents?
Tell me that last portion again. Use some big words there.
Okay. Have you encountered solutions as you're talking through an issue? You encountered solutions that perhaps was an unpalatable concession to policymakers and their constituents. So you have an issue and you have pro and con, and then you decide on a third issue that's a pretty unpalatable concession for the policymakers and their constituents.
The problem that we have in politics, and Martin Luther King said in one of his speeches, in politics, politicians ask themselves several questions. First, is it political? Then they ask, is it safe? Then they ask themselves, is it expedient? But one should ask itself, is it right? The conscious ask if it's right. And unfortunately, we have found ourselves in a polarized society, polarized politically, and I blame the polarization of politics on our polarization in our country. And people, I serve with 105 individuals, and they're all good human beings. But they are driven by the desire of our handful of people who makes the decisions. And I call them the party bosses. And we have too much Democrats and too much Republicans. And we need to be Americans, and we need to be Louisianans. And often the political will of individuals they want to do it. I've had bills that people say, I agree with you, but I can't vote for it. I can't vote for it. How disheartening if your convictions are strong, but you're voting against the betterment of the society or the people because the party boss says, I can't do it.
And that's a perfect example. You have an issue on the table and another person says, I can't vote for it. So then you find a third path that's not palatable to either side.
Well, what happened, it remains the status quo. That's the third path. That's the third path. The status quo remains. So, I mean, you get nothing done. And the majority rules. As a minority member of the House, what we can stop is any constitutional amendment or any 2/3 votes. We can stop those because if we weren't, you wouldn't have Medicaid expansion. You wouldn't have the prison reform that you have. And I go back and before we leave, because somebody just touched on it, and there is a piece of the savings to go to juvenile justice. But Don Craven, Senator Craven's, back in the early 90s, along with a group of people, went to look throughout the country, and they adopted what they call the Missouri model. Missouri State had the best criminal justice for juvenile system in the country, and came back and we brought it, back, they brought it back to Louisiana. We adopted, but we didn't fund it. We didn't fund it at all. And what I'm afraid of, all the hard work, all the blood, sweat, and tears going to criminal justice reform, and we're not paying enough attention to juvenile justice. We're just clearing beds for another generations of criminals if we don't pay attention to our young kids through education, intervention, mental health, and all those other issues that drive them into the pipeline.
If I can add something to that, just to emphasize Representative Landry's point about juvenile justice. So just recently, you may have seen in the news that the Boyles Juvenile Detention Facility was opened. It's the first one that has a therapeutic model. That has been sitting vacant for 5 years more because of what Representative Landry said. It was built, but the money to operate it was not there. So we've been sitting on an asset for no reason. And then, so you have people like that Alex works with every day that need those services, and we're not doing anything to make sure that these people get them, and especially these children.
And we have revenue estimate forecasting. You may have read it, and one guy stopped to recognize the money. Part of that money was for that initiative, and the governor said, to hell with it, I'm going to open this facility. But that's the result of this conservative movement. Government is too big. I don't know where in America where having a surplus should be a problem. But that's what we face, all in an attempt to block this governor's re-election. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
And like Lafayette Parish Juvenile Detention Home, it was 2016 we had the major flood here, right? Yeah. So in 2016, during the flood, it was 2 Butler buildings. Butler building in the back, that was their classroom, but it flooded. So they've gone without a classroom since 2016. They've only now, recently, within the last month or 2, started to build something new. But the students have been in the rec area inside the jail having class there. But it's not a proper place for a class. People are walking in and out all the time. Guards are yelling, walking in and out all the time. For me to have class now is hard. It went from us creating a group home that we're now paying at Meshes on Willow and the King Center to barely being able to have a conversation because there are so many distractions. So how can we educate our incarcerated youth if we don't provide them with the proper facility to do so? I don't understand. I don't understand why it's not important for us to educate our youth. If we want our juveniles to stop committing these crimes over and over again, when they come to this juvenile facility, it should be a part of their curriculum to rehabilitate them, to offer them the education that they need. Since they're not able to get it anywhere else, they're incarcerated, they're being punished. Well, let's educate them. We have teachers that are hired to do so on a daily basis with them at the facility, but they don't have a place to teach. There's no chalkboard, there's nothing for them to write on. They have to, just at a table here and, try and instruct as best as they can without the tools that a teacher needs. I think it's important that if we want a better society, it starts from the bottom up. It starts with our youth.
I think I can answer your original question with actually the reverse, where there was a third solution, a third option that was posed that we actually did move forward with. So with the overall report that came out from the JRI task force, there was a myriad of recommendations made to the legislature that dealt with reform for both violent and non-violent offenses. The majority of any of the changes regarding violent offenses were taken out, but there was a small window of compromise that we made that I think really in the future, the data that comes from this will pave the path to push for more reform with violent offenders. One of the recommendations was for the option of parole eligibility for lifers, which I think, Kathy, all of us who work in corrections, when we think of the top 5 people probably look like, man, they need a second chance, it's most likely violent offenders. And that's usually, when you look at the data, even the likelihood of recidivating for someone who comes out on a violent offense is actually much lower than a non-violent offense. So that recommendation didn't make it. The DAs were very opposed to that, and part of the argument is, these are people who Promises were made to the victims. We can't go back and change that. And again, the recommendation was not to release someone, but to give them a shot at the parole board to show what they've done with their life, that they've made changes, they've made amends with their victims. But rather than completely saying no, the compromise was there's this small population of people, about 300, who were convicted of second-degree murder in the 1970s, which actually at the time, the penalty for second-degree murder was life with parole. So there's a lot of guys who went in the 1970s given a life sentence, and they had the possibility of parole of 20 to 40 years. The legislature came back about 5 years later and changed that. They removed it retroactively. And then there was a couple of lawsuits arguing that it was unconstitutional, but ultimately at the end of the day, the decision stood. So the agreement was, all right, we'll open the door for this 300 people who were given the opportunity for parole when they were sentenced. The victims knew going in, this person may go before the board. So we did carve out the opportunity for parole eligibility for about 300 lifers. That's been in effect for about a year. There's probably been about 20 guys who've been released pursuant to that. The Parole Project is a huge part of that. They're really providing the support and the assistance. But that, while it may be small, when we look at that over the next couple of years, I guarantee you, you're going to see that 99.9% of these guys have been successful. And overall, with this whole criminal justice reform effort, the truth is it wasn't new. I mean, we saw the big bipartisan legislation come out, but there's been 15 years of pockets across the state of people chipping away. But really, I think personally, and for whatever my assessment's worth, is when the legislature really bought into it this past 2 years because they saw the data. The data is telling us that's where you get the right more. The data is telling us that if we reduce sentences, it will have a positive impact on our crime rates, things like that. So even with this small window, it was a third option. You know, it wasn't yes or no, we're not doing anything with violent offenders. It's we'll take a chance with this population right here who hopefully in the next couple of years will be the best argument to the legislature of why we should expand it to include more people to give them the chance at parole eligibility who otherwise didn't have it.
And Natalie raises a great point because it brings victims back into the conversation. And that is the people who have been hurt the worst. They should have a voice. And they do have a voice through that. And so, yeah, you're exactly right on that. I think that's going to go a long way because we'll have living proof that it is working.
I would like to add something to this because I really didn't like when they started the violent, nonviolent classes. I'm a violent offender, and I had no one who was harmed in any way, physical or otherwise, in my crime. But I'm listed as a violent offender. I had an armed robbery charge. So I know a lot of times when people hear the term violent offender, you instantly, automatically think that someone got hurt or someone was murdered. But that is not the case. You know, a lot of people on this side of a prison fence does not know that. And the majority of violent offenders that I know who have been released from prison, these are your people who will never go back to prison again. What I often saw, the ones who repeatedly returned to prison were your nonviolent offenders. And this is something that people really need to look at and really think about because it's a case-by-case thing when it comes to violent offenders. Because just because a person is listed or labeled as a violent offender doesn't mean that they're violent. And I saw your reactions when you looked at me. You were like, a violent offender? You? Yes, I'm one of those. Yeah, we won't work. Might bite your head off. You know? And we just have a very bad tendency of labeling and making people look or seem way more horrible than what they actually are. And I just wanted to put that out there so you can know that everyone who is classified or deemed a violent offender, more than likely, whatever that offense was a once in a lifetime thing. It will never happen again.
And if that person was violent, what caused them to be violent? I was at a career center doing a workshop one day, and the student, he hadn't been violent yet, thank God. But he told me, he pulled me offside, he said, you know, Miss Alex, I'm bullied all the time, and people here, they say that I look like a school shooter, and sometimes I feel like it. What's happening in his life that would make him think that he should shoot up his school? That he's bullied so much that people pick on him every single day and compare him to that. That he is contemplating, well, maybe I should just do it. There are so many people who are pushed past that line. Not because they want to go there, but because emotionally they lack coping skills, or they're just bullied. It's important that we take time to realize that these situations, like you said, happen just at one time because of something that exacerbated their problems, exacerbated that moment. So everyone deserves a second chance.
Councilman, we'll go back to you for the next question. How society treats prisoners says more about us than it says about prisoners. What vocational, educational, and substance abuse resources are available to prisoners inside the system?
They do have substance abuse, NA, AA, but it just depends on what facility you're being housed at. Before the flood of 2016, and we were evacuated from LCIW, there were quite a few programs that were offered there for the women. And I remember us always comparing ourselves to the guys. We were always, well, they have this, or why we don't have that? And we would argue this for years. And I believe it was State Representative Pat Smith who pushed to get job skill training for high demand, high paying jobs. And that was the welding. And so we went from doing sewing and upholstery, culinary arts, drafting and design, office system technology, to welding. So those are the types of vocational classes that are were offered in the female facility. But now, being that they're all spread out in some private facilities, some parish facilities, they don't have a lot of those classes that are offered. They may have a substance abuse class, but they will definitely not have very many vocational classes like were offered. And I stay in contact with a lot of the women, and so many of them are lifers. And for a long time, because a person had a certain amount of time, especially lifers, they couldn't even get into a vocational class because they had too much time. They would always take people who had shorter amounts of time. And one of my clients, actually, I was able to file a 19 JDC motion because of that. And she was a lifer. Matter of fact, she was a juvenile lifer, but she was just granted parole recently. And her issue was she wanted to earn her GED, but was not allowed into the class because of her sentence. So that's been changed. And a lot of the women, they're struggling with the fact that they're so used to having been at LCIW where they had a lot of programs, and now they're in these different facilities where there's absolutely nothing. All they have to do is sit around and look at each other, watch TV, play cards, that's it, all day. So, but if they're in Lafayette Parish Prison, probably has more to offer on the parish level than a lot of parish facilities. But those, the programs, they're needed. They're needed, they're necessary as far as rehabilitation, but it just varies from facility to facility what is actually offered.
Marcus, was that similar for you?
Well, she's been recently released. I've been home for going on 16 years now, so I don't know exactly what's happening inside of the prison system unless it's like the Lafayette Parish. But I do know that because I recently started a program where I go back into the parish and I try to empower young men to, just to wake up and see the big picture. And what I see inside of there is that they have idle time is what's killing them. Idle time is doing nothing for them at all. And you probably have about 70–80% of them that is coming home. And maybe 50% of them is coming home from that parish jail. And now you have a fear of prison that's dissipated. So when they do come home, now they're angry, and they're not educated, and the system is gonna make it impossible for them to get a job. If you don't have a GED, and most of them went in because the parish school system found a way to prohibit them from getting a high school diploma. So when they get a GED, first without a GED, they can't pursue higher education. So I guess the answer is everyone in this room, we all think different, we all feel different, but we all have ideas on how we could fix stuff. We could fix that problem. So maybe we all need to put our seeds together, our minds, and find out what exactly, because everyone in there is going to be interested in something else. You never know what seed that person is going to gravitate to, but we have to offer something. I don't care if it's arbitrary, like not everybody is going to be interested in the same thing, but we need to have some avenues available. Not everyone wants to be a welder. I understand they have welding there right now, but not everyone is equipped to be a welder, So we need to find some kind of, just some avenues in there to get people to gravitate to. But I do know, like I was telling Ms. Consuelo earlier, we cannot continue to just let these young people grow into monsters. Because what is going to happen when we're too old to defend ourselves and we didn't do anything to prevent them from becoming monsters? And the way this world is going today, the social media, just this entertainment industry period, is teaching these kids that they could take what they want. So what's going to happen when they're kicking in the doors? Because now they're armed with the ammunition. And before I go any further, I'd like to say that becoming a criminal is a process. That's not something that we wake up and just become a criminal. You understand? These guys, these kids in the streets, these underserved kids, we didn't create the ghetto, all right? The hood wasn't created by us. It was created by the powers that the people that could create it, that didn't want to live among other people, so they created that. Now, when you're in the hood, you have to survive in the hood. So you have to resort to some things to make it because you're designed to survive and you're going to figure out a way to survive. All right? So, and if the only thing they're offering is, and the trauma, like someone was mentioning, is real. What they're experiencing is trauma. They also mentioned mental health. They also mentioned crack. You have these kids experiencing trauma. Their mom's getting gunned down. Why? Because mine did. They meet their dad selling them crack. I did. I watched my sisters get molested, get beat when I was too young to do anything. Watched my mom get gunned down more than one time. You understand? Like that's the stuff that these kids, so trauma is real. And they're not getting any help being diagnosed because trauma creates mental issues. So then they're self-medicating themselves with the crack and the drugs that's being put in the streets for them to create crime to fill up the prisons. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to come up with some kind of plan with the ones that are already incarcerated, and we have to offer some avenues. We need them to gravitate towards something. I happen to work because I look like them, because I am them. Okay, so, but I can't. I'm limited because of my conviction. I'm not allowed everywhere else. I'm not, and on the violent thing, I apologize for taking so much time. On the violent thing, I was actually, everything that I told you previously that I went through that for defending myself from armed robbers. So my case was a one-in-a-lifetime thing. And if when you're incarcerated, you reach a point where your auspiciousness is at its highest. All you want to do is prove to the world that you have some beauty in you. And then you go up for parole and they deny you that. That's when you become angry. That's when you don't care no more, because all you want to do is prove to the world that you are human, that you made, and half of the time they're incarcerated and don't know how they got there. But it's the trauma, the anger that they don't know where it came from, that made them kill this guy. This guy shot his mama, so he got him back. But all of those people behind that fence, we don't know what was the cause for them being incarcerated. It could have been something that happened when they were 3 years old that they have to live with every day of their lives. So
if I can finally get you something. I didn't thinking about I want to speak after you anyway. One of the most heartbreaking stories I have as a lawyer was for a mother to call me. And she said to me, Mr. Milton, I told my son, never bring dope in my house. She only had one child. She never experienced anything involving the criminal justice system. And one day she walks into the child's room and he's taking a shower. But on his dresser, sure enough, there it is, crack cocaine. She calls the police department, but she always promised him that if he ever brought dope in her house, she was gonna have him, she was gonna call the police and she was gonna have him dealt with. He was gonna get away with it. She held to that promise and she called the police. When the police came in, they put a gun in her face and immobilized her on the sofa. They went into the shower, they grabbed her son out of there and made him come out of the room with a towel wrapped around him and put him in the car, took him down, booked him. She's calling me, she's saying, Miss Miller, what do I do? My son's calling me, he's begging me to come get him out of jail. What do I do? So, man, I have to bond him out. Bond him out, what's that? I don't have money for that. That's the only way you can get him out, man, is to call downtown, there's a bond. You can bond him out, we'll deal with it later. But if we're gonna do anything about truly changing the criminal justice system, it's gonna have to start before the kids even get in prison. And it can't, and with the pendulum of politics, swinging to the right, then back to the left, and back. I understand, Representative, I understand your concerns about if there's no vote, what's gonna happen next, and defunding and et cetera. And there'll be a notification of all the progress that has been made. If this criminal reform is not based upon morality, that it is the right thing to do, not justified because it's going to save taxpayers a lot of money, not justified because it's going to increase our workforce for companies so that people can make more money who own businesses. It has to be justified based on morality and our desire to have a more just community. I just want to say that.
And I want you guys to sit again with the image. And close your eyes.
I'm sorry, just for the sake of time.
Okay.
Let's just, yeah. Constable, do you have anything to add on what individuals face when they leave the criminal justice system?
Sure. Probably one of the first things a person will face, of course, is housing. I mean, when you get out of prison, the first thing you need to do is have somewhere to lay your head. Depending on whether or not that person had some type of support system, as I was blessed to, I know many people who come out of prison that don't have that, who have disconnected or their family have disconnected and pretty much disown them and don't want to have anything to do with them. So that person is left pretty much to fend for themselves. And when you have people like that, chances are they'll end up back in prison. Another thing people face is trying to find a job. And along with that is transportation. So if you don't have transportation, it may be hard for you to get to a job and keep a job. But if you don't have money, you won't really be able to afford to get your own transportation. Therefore, you'll be relying on someone else to bring you back and forth to work. So those are things that I see people face immediately upon release. It's housing, because within your first 72 hours, you have to report into your parole officer. And they expect you within a month to pay your parole fee. Everyone isn't able to pay that fee. Not only that, a lot of times, most people, you don't have your own home. You're living with someone else. I know when I came home, I was living with my sister. Her son came home from prison 3 days after I did. And he was a little thug. And he carried guns, drugs. So I knew I had to get out of that environment. But it took me 9 months to get my own place. And people often go into situations like that. I mean, he and I had the same parole officer. And that was done because we lived under the same roof. But I had to remove myself before I ended up going back to prison for keeping my nephew. And it's sad. I mean, he's 24 and he's back in the parish prison now because of the life he chooses to lead. He doesn't have a father figure. He's the only boy. He has 2 sisters. And he's the baby, spoiled. So you have people who come home and he's never worked a day in his life. So he does not know what it means to show up on the job, do your job. He doesn't know anything about work ethics. Because like I said, he's never had a job. We would get him places where he could go to work. He would show up 30 minutes late for the interview. Because he has chosen to live a certain lifestyle. But when people come home, if they don't have a stable environment to return to, housing where you have to lay your head, that can either make or break a person coming out of prison. If they're going to have somewhere to lay their head and to eat.
Really quick, I just really hope the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, the money that comes back as a taxpayer, you're paying for them to build the support system that we have for them in the prisons, in the jails, in the work release centers, the transportation, the housing, the healthcare. I would much rather my dollars from that savings go into the community to hire, voices of the experience at the local, at the parish, at the state level, because there's tons of jobs and tons of help that you could do in diversion programs and things like that. And that is one thing, if I'm ever in a position, and I've talked to you about this before extensively, I believe so much in the product that we're creating when a person applies themselves and finds that, and we can work together and do that. I'd much rather have you as a neighbor than somebody who, didn't do those things. But I want to say this, unfortunately, budgets are based on numbers, not on needs. Women and juveniles keep getting shortchanged because of this. They have less facilities, they have less resources, they definitely have nothing in terms of reentry that I would even give credit to at this point. They're having to do that themselves. There are women who have gotten out in other parishes that are creating jobs and hiring ex-offenders in and really make statements, and it's so rewarding to see, but that's the kind of support we need. We need vibrant community centers that are filled with people, like yourselves to be that example, and Representative Landry, can we do that with the Justice Reinvestment dollars? Can we?
Well, I think we're
Natalie is looking at me, and she know I have some strong opinions about how the justice reinvestment money is being spent. Matter of fact, I raised a little hell the last meeting.
I don't want to lose anything on my investment though.
No, but I asked a simple question. How much is being spent on education?
I think it was 1% of our budget we did a long time ago.
I'm talking about a justice reinvestment. I asked the question. Well, we won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but you're right. They need to be retooling that. I'm sorry. I'm done.
All right. Dr. Stearns, the cost of housing prisoners is gaining traction as an impetus for reforming the criminal justice system on both sides of the aisle. How much does the prison system cost the state of Louisiana? And what are some of the hidden costs that could be avoided with the implementation of specific reforms?
Okay, I'll try and make this brief. But I do believe in compassion, and that all the major belief systems command us to be compassionate to one another, command justice. That is a very valid point. Legislators don't really care about compassion, they care about numbers. So numbers are extremely important. Right now, we spend a little over $600 million on corrections. Who pays for that? Raise your hand, please. Yeah. When's the last time that you wrote to your legislator and told him or her that you were unhappy with that amount? You pay $11,000 per student in Louisiana to get an education. You pay over $16,000 per inmate to be warehoused in Louisiana. This is a considerable amount of money. If those amounts were reversed, think of what we could do. And then remember that who we incarcerate, you've got 58% nonviolent offenders, 18% drug charges only, not including, as Consuela mentioned, the violent offenders who are only classified as violent because of a technicality. This is wasted money. Your money is being wasted in Louisiana. The families of incarcerated individuals, 1 in 5 will be evicted from their homes. They struggle financially, not only from the loss of income, but from the cost of gas, phone calls, putting their child through programs that comes with having an incarcerated person in the family. Once an incarcerated person does get released, they owe an average of about $13,000 that they need to repay. And of course, if they don't repay that, they go straight back. But they're hampered in repaying that money because they're not eligible for certain things like government aid, housing assistance, food stamps. Can you imagine someone looking at you and saying, "You do not deserve to eat. You do not deserve to eat." And I used to be a social worker, so I know how this goes. You may not be eligible for disability. You may not be eligible for Social Security. You may also not be able to gain an education because you're not allowed entry into a university. So what we have is a system that is set up to guarantee failure on the part of people who struggle. And again, the people who are incarcerated are not the middle class or the upper class, they're the lower class. They do not deserve to live among us, is what you are telling them. Have you written your legislators about this? Do you know who your legislators are? Did you vote in the last election? Did you devote a little bit of time to researching who is up for election and what they stood for? Did you go to maybe their town hall talk and ask them, what is your view on the incarceration rates and what can we do? It is up to you all. We can all sit here in this room, this row of people can tell you the problems and the injustice and the lack of compassion and how our incarceration rate, by the way, Oklahoma is now #1, but Louisiana is still #2, how it hampers us in so many ways. But we're not going to do anything by just sitting and talking about it. We have to be activists. It is hard, it takes time. I don't have the energy, I'm exhausted. I understand. You have busy lives. Maybe incarceration, you think it doesn't affect you at all, but it does. It affects your pocket. Even if you don't know anybody who's incarcerated, if you don't know anything about the criminal justice system, it is costing you money. Money that could make your community safer and better and prettier and a more vibrant, joyful place to live for everybody, especially for those kids who did not play any part in their parents' actions, right? So there are a multitude of hidden costs. Most importantly, as many people have brought up, and we didn't discuss youth a lot today, but if your parent was incarcerated, you are at high risk for being incarcerated yourself. Why can't we stop this? Why can't we do something about it? Why can't we invest more in our schools and in our juveniles? Everybody talks about, yes, our children are important, but you won't pay more money for, the library millage. Lafayette wouldn't pay that. Libraries are important. Our kids are important. Education is important. Everything starts early, and we have to invest in our kids and in our communities. You can't just slap a Band-Aid on crime and say, crime is bad, criminals are bad, too bad. That is not the way this works. So tell your friends, be an activist, do some research, start posting things online, just facts and figures about what's going on in jails and prisons. Go visit a jail. Go visit Angola. Have you been? Have you talked to inmates? You can do that. You pay for those institutions. You can go there and say, I'd like a tour. So please keep that in mind. The costs are astronomical for all of us.
Okay.
Just very quickly to bring this to a local level, the Lafayette Parish Jail, the Sheriff's Office, estimates that it costs about $65 a day to house a prisoner there. And just remember that Lafayette offers a lot more services and supports than any other does. So with an average of 900 inmates, that is just a bottom line cost of $21 million a year. That is just within our parish. That doesn't include the time for the court system, probation and parole, all the other parts of our criminal justice system. That is just the amount to incarcerate them.
And that's a healthy inmate, by the way.
Yes.
Cross numbers of 100 for those. Real quick, 80% in Lafayette are substance abusers, 30% are severely mentally ill, just in that one jail room. So, yeah.
Holly, that's a good segue into our first question from the audience. What are the best ways to support, and this is not for anyone in particular, what are the best ways to support and encourage local sheriffs to increase programming?
I think the criminal justice reform initiative is a good start. I think it's starting to incentivize some people. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the tiered approach that they went into. Lafayette Parish has been doing reentry for almost 20 years, starting with Sheriff Newstrom. But yet we're tier 2. We have not gotten any, we've gotten $20,000 from DOC to fund community coordination for the Lafayette Reentry Coalition, and that's really thanks to Judge Jules Edwards. But we were a model, and in fact, Secretary LeBlanc brought a group of people to view the Lafayette facility as a model for other entities to copy. And so, but what I really don't want is for Lafayette to say, okay, we're already good, we're a model. we're still at the bottom of the barrel. Even if we're number 2 or number 3, we have so much further to go. And Lafayette is ready for the resources that are needed.
To couple with that, first of all, I would say that the writing's on the wall for the sheriffs with $24.39, which is the current per diem rate. It's not profitable anymore unless you're one of those, your housing, your numbers are substantial. So there's roughly, I believe in the last 2 or 3 years, 30 local jails have closed down, which in my opinion is a good thing. But I think the sheriffs who are operating good programs at the local level will be incentivized based on a graduated per diem, utilizing the reinvestment dollars. So we are, legislators and governor and secretary are willing to increase the amount that we're paying to house people, but it comes with a condition. It's not just for lock and feed, it's to increase the programs beyond what your current capacity is or create new ones. And then just to answer the question about the first and second tier, I understand that it's frustrating. In a perfect world, we would want to start with every single parish. The reality is that the savings and the reinvestment portion that DOC has to reinvest into the local level is not a lot of money when you think about $2.5 million in the context of a $600 million budget at just our state facility with roughly $200 million at the local level. So we had to strategically go, okay, this money can't go very far. How can we take the first year, 2.5, and reinvest it back into the community? So the first 5 parishes were those that generate roughly 70% of the intake every year. The second tier, which truthfully will begin in 2 months, the second round of funding, which includes Lafayette as well. So it's really not the first year, but that is the reasoning behind it. It wasn't just to not pick where they already are doing successful programs. It's just finding a way to make a little bit of money go a long way. And that's been, the savings are wonderful, but it's not a ton of money in the big scheme of things. So that's just how we were organized and allocated.
Has there ever been any consideration about support or financing more independent public defense, a more independent public defense system?
I'll try to answer that. As I was on the public defender board last year, they just are in an absolute crunch. There is not enough money for public defenders. And we have public defenders who have hundreds of people on their caseload. And these are people who, life or death matters sometimes. And so the question is about independent funding for public defenders?
Actually for financing.
For financing, yeah. The problem is that so much money for public defenders depends on local taxes. And local taxes are down everywhere. It also depends on things like the sheriff agreeing to give, if you get a ticket, sometimes some of that money will go to a program called LACE, where a lot of that money went to public defenders, and there was some corruption within that program, allegedly, and it was shut down, putting public defenders into even a greater crunch. The bottom line is we've got to change our laws where we don't arrest so many people. Can I throw out legalized marijuana here because I really want to throw that out? There has got to be, thank you, there has got to be less laws and less punitive laws to where we don't have a public defender who only has so many hours in the week defending 400 to 500 people whose lives depend on this one person. That's ridiculous. The American Bar Association has told our public defenders that they are unethical for their caseloads, and yet those are their caseloads. The only answer is hiring more public defenders, which the state of Louisiana has no money and we can't do. Why don't we look at the front end? Get rid of some of these laws. Open more behavioral mental health centers. Open more substance abuse centers. Quit arresting so many people.
Let me just add to it. If I may, for the sake of time, I just want to talk about the public defenders a little bit. They're funded mostly by fees and fines and court costs. But what happens is we have a law in the book called the death penalty. When a person is sentenced to death, it automatically is an appeal to the Supreme Court. And you have to hire these specialty law firms that is sucking all the funds out of the
$10 million when I was on the board, $10 million for a handful of people. Their lives are important, but that's where that money goes. Public defender's money goes to death penalty cases. Abolish the death penalty, you'll save money.
I agree.
Okay, the next question. Isn't releasing an elderly inmate to his family just passing the end-of-life burden, financial, medical, to the family?
Excuse me, what was the question?
It's like, isn't releasing an elderly inmate to his family just passing the end-of-life burden to the family? And they're referring to financial, medical, etc.
Well, I can speak to how that would work for us on a DOC level. We have basically 3 release mechanisms for medical needs. One would be medical parole, and typically that's someone who's in the last year or 2 of a debilitating medical condition. First and second degree murder convictions are restricted from that, which is typically your older population. That was something that the task force chose to look at. It's a very contentious issue. Anytime there's ever been some push to change and open that up more. The option we came up with was something called medical treatment furlough, which is very similar, but it opened up the door for more eligibility of first and second degree murder convictions. I wouldn't say it's a burden because the release also, 99% of our people releasing are now Medicaid eligible. So with the Medicaid expansion, that would pick up the cost of that, and we are in processing anyone who releases pursuant to that. We ensure that they're enrolled in Medicaid and or hospice to provide that. And then the third release mechanism, which is on the secretary personally, is what we call compassionate release. And that's typically someone who's within 30 to 60 days of their end of life. And I've never seen him deny one other than if it was a very, very contentious, heinous crime with a lot of victim opposition. But all of those things would implicate Medicaid. So maybe a couple years ago that would have had a burden on the family, but all of that's now at this point, unless you're not Medicaid eligible, but that's pretty much known at this point. So that is covered by that. It wouldn't be a financial burden at this point.
We have two questions.
You know, just the question itself kind of perplexes me because when people die, people come from all over the country to the funeral. Why do we wait till they die? They can't harm anybody, and part of the reason for them being in prison is to protect the community, but they're in a wheelchair, they can't even move their arm, they have a stroke. They can't harm anybody. Why not let them go and be loved, or also give love, and who knows what instructions they might be able to pass down to members of that family so that they might deter some of their loved ones from going in the same direction. So I think
No, I think that's I think you're making the same policy argument that so many people have made to the legislature to open up the door. That again, those things are governed by the laws that will allow someone to be eligible or not.
I'm saying that we must ask the moral question, not just an economic question, not just a policy question, but the moral question.
And let me just add, I've made numerous requests on behalf of families, and Secretary of Law has never denied a request that I've made.
Yeah, he was very, very adamant about, he would be a big proponent of, if you came to Angola and saw it's become older, elderly, very sick, can't hurt anyone. I mean, he'd be happy, he always says, I'd release them all to a nursing home or family. And he's also a huge proponent of just like we mentioned, the end of life, people should always be with their family and loved ones.
We were the first prison hospice in Angola to allow the family who couldn't accept the inmate back to come to Angola and stay all night over vigil. We were the first true hospice that was run by inmates who were also lifers being in that position. There's a wonderful documentary called Starting Life. It's on Netflix. Lisa Cohen, who was a great ABC advocate for us and did a lot of things and did this on her own for the Winfrey Network. It's wonderful. It shows you the process they go through, but also the dying process, and very compassionate for those people who didn't. We had like 30 deaths a year, And the average age to death, I've tracked it for 20 years, believe it or not, was 51. It's among the inmate population. They are a sick population, just like what we're seeing in our facilities. I mean, so you really get about 15 years off of a life sentence anyway, when you get it on average, but that's just my unofficial stats. They sound good. But anyway, they can come to prison and see the funeral. It was a beautiful funeral, horse drug, hearse that was hand-built by inmates. The coffins are hand-built. Billy Graham got buried in one recently, you may remember, last year or so. So a lot of good, positive things that we allow the inmate population to be dignified and to express compassion for the all, they understood the importance of life. And that is our job.
We have two questions that are closely related. One is, why can't we let more pretrial detainees out until their trial? And also, why do we permit pretrial detainees to be called offenders?
Because they're poor.
They're what?
Because they're poor. We have a profit-making bail system where people are in business to make money off of bail. If you are middle class or upper class, you don't even spend a night in jail, and you ultimately have a better chance of your case. When I worked with women in the prison, thanks to Warden Fontenot that let me in, almost all those women had not been to trial. These are innocent people who are treated like inmates. They are treated like offenders because they cannot bond out. So once again, let me ask you, you are being told that you are a criminal because you do not have the money to bond out. I can bond out, I'm not a criminal. Somebody else can't bond out, they are a criminal, and they are treated like a criminal. That is not fair, and there are some states that have done away with bail. I think it might be Kentucky that has successfully eliminated bail. This is another avenue that we need to pursue. Because being poor should not be a crime, but it is.
I would also like to say it's the mindset of our community. And so are we locking people up because we're scared of them? That's the right reason. If we are scared that they're going to harm somebody in our community, we should be locking them up. But if we're mad at them for what we think they did, that's the wrong reason to be locking someone up. I mean, for a long time we had that punishment philosophy for criminal behavior, and this is where we are right now, and the poverty is just completely exacerbated that.
Okay, I have a question here. Do you have opinions on having state prisoners work cleaning state buildings or doing other work? When I worked with state, we had prisoners cleaning, and I think our interaction was positive for both prisoners and employees. I have a personal note to add to this. I know when I worked for the state in Baton Rouge, we weren't allowed to interact with the prisoners as they were cleaning the offices.
I think it's a good thing. A lot of people, especially the inmates, while we're in, a lot of times we don't really like our jobs because most times we don't get to pick our jobs. But I think it has an advantage of allowing people, like I said, I had a nephew who never worked a day in his life. Probably the only time he worked was while he was in prison. While I was still in prison, I ended up in the garment factory and was sewing. And I was like, I know when I go home, I am not about to be sewing. I never used a sewing machine in my life. But guess what? My first full-time job, I was on the sewing machine. And I was being paid above minimum wage. And my boss knew that I was a convicted felon. And had I not learned that particular trade or that particular skill while I was incarcerated, I wouldn't have had that job for a whole year, where I was able to take care of myself. Since I've been home, I haven't had to ask anyone for money or to help me financially. And it gives a person independence. So those jobs that inmates work whether it's at work release or it's in the prison. Like I said, we don't realize it, but eventually those job skills can be transferable to a job out here in the free world. And I see people all the time with who cut grass, and the women cut grass like every day in the prison facility, and they probably never want to see another lawnmower or weed eater ever again. But those are good paying jobs. That's even a skill that a person can use to have their own business. And I know someone who's right here in Lafayette that I did time with. She graduated from horticulture, and now she has her own landscaping company. So, like I said, many people don't realize how important it is for someone who's serving time to have a job and to learn different job skills and to learn job ethics while they're working, because like I said, those things can be transferable to a free world job, and they're able to sustain it and to live.
And also, how many of y'all have eaten in a restaurant in Lafayette Parish in the last month? You have probably had an inmate either prepare your food, take your order, or clean up after you. We have a very robust transitional work program in Lafayette Parish, and so we are putting, these can either be pretrial detainees or they can be convicted offenders into the community, because they need that experience. They need a way to reconnect with the community. And as I said, when they get out, they need a place to live, and they definitely need a job. And having a job, they can save the money, and then when they get out, they can get a place. They don't have to live with a thug like Consuelo. So, and I'm sure Kathy can talk more details.
Only to say that this parish does a phenomenal job at work release, and about 96% of the inmates who start a job in work release continue to have those jobs. The employers are very, very excited about it. It's more education, and we need to see people as different as the last time we saw them on the evening news when they did the worst thing of their life. Anytime, and look, I used to say this about the Angola radio. We got people in, but we also educate them. We had all these digital signs, and we showed them around. And, it's important for that inmate to see himself in someone else that's looking back at him as somebody different. It really is. And that's what works when you have a good community relationship with employers. And when we rehabilitate an inmate, we have got to rehabilitate that community at the same time. Does it work? If Consuelo comes out today, and there's one person out there that doesn't want Consuelo out there, it's going to be very difficult, probably impossible. She's not going to make it. If she goes to work release and I get one call, I have to send her back, or to another work release around the state. That's how much effort goes into this, and still we make mistakes. It's not perfect, but that's the concept. It's like the fear. You can't keep everybody fearful of the worst thing that's going to happen. We have got to start using good examples of successes that happen. And so I think everybody here is obviously want to see that.
We're going to end the questioning here, but as you can see at the start, we said we could go on till midnight. And if everybody wants to, we can get Cox. But we're going to end it here. And I just want to say, can we have some appreciation for such a